Gosh, Stephen, you shared the topic with me here on the Empire Builders podcast, and you've got me kind of stumped. Oh, by the way, you're listening to the Empire Builders podcast. I forgot to say that, but that's okay. Leave this in. This is
This is
and
reality.
this is reality. This is how this actually works. It's like, no, Dave got stumped. So it's not that I haven't heard of today's topic, but it's not what I thought. When you said that today's topic is the Marlboro Man. It's not Marlboro cigarettes. It's not the tobacco industry. It's the Marlboro Man.
The man. Yes.
The man. Awesome. So basically we're talking about advertising and marketing here
Yes.
at its core.
At its core. Yes, we are.
Because the Marlboro Man was not just there's no historical figure, I don't believe.
Well, there is a guy who played the Marlboro Man.
Right.
We'll talk a little bit about him, but no,
Let's hear it.
it's really more about the advertisement. Yes.
Do tell.
Well, the thing that's really interesting about the whole character of the Marlboro Man, it was created by Leo Burnett Agency in Chicago, and the campaign ran from 1954 to 1999. And it turned a struggling brand into a market leader by the 1960s. Like Marlboro became the most successful cigarette brand in the world. And by the late 1960s, it had, 25% market share. And by 1970, it was selling $20 billion worldwide. Like that's a
Amazing.
big, big number.
To me, the story is, what were they doing before the Marlboro Man that wasn't working?
Well, and that's the thing, because historically speaking, the Marlboro Man was one of the most successful advertising campaigns of all time. And it's often cited as a great example of how advertising can also shape cultural values and perceptions. Like, it's
Yeah.
amazing how Marlboro Man hasn't been around since 1999, and yet we can say to people Marlboro Man, and we can all recall those ads.
Especially before, I forget what year, 77, 70, whenever they outlawed cigarette advertising on TV and radio.
Yeah, because then it was the billboard campaigns.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's widely considered one of the most successful campaigns of all time. But what also people don't realize, it was not an overnight success. This campaign almost got pulled.
Okay.
In 1955, 1 year after launch, it was almost canceled due to poor sales. 1 year into this campaign, they're going, this is working. Maybe we should do something different.
Hmm.
The other thing that's interesting is that this campaign was actually a major repositioning of the product.
Okay.
Marlboro started off as a female-centric brand. You're asking what they did before the Marlboro Man?
Yeah.
They marketed Marlboros to women. So talk
Okay.
about that pivot. They went from marketing it to women to marketing it to men. In 1924, when Marlboro was launched, it was originally marketed as a brand for women. The filter tip design was popular with women, and the tagline was mild as May.
Mild as May.
And it included lines like ivory tips to protect the lips.
Okay.
And there was one famous ad from the early 1950s, which featured a woman in a pink dress holding a cigarette, gazing wistfully out the window. And the tagline read, "Come to where the flavor is, come to Marlboro County."
Marlboro County.
Marlboro County.
County.
Started off as Marlboro County rather than Marlboro Country. So the print ad showed glamorous women smoking Marlboros. And the challenge was that in the 1950s, the number of women smoking started to decline, but the number of men smoking was rising in terms of smoking
Okay.
cigarettes. So it's this shift in consumer trend that made them want to reposition Marlboro as a man's cigarette. So the idea for the Marlboro Man campaign is generally attributed to Leo Burnett, the founder of the advertising agency, Leo Burnett Worldwide. And according to legend, Burnett came up with the idea for the campaign while he was on a business trip to Richmond, Virginia, where he saw a group of cowboys herding cattle along the side of the road. And he was struck by the image of these rugged, self-reliant men. And he saw an opportunity to use this image to reposition the Marlboro brand.
You use an iconic touch point in traditions and history of Americana in the West.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And attach that to the brand. And Burnett believed that the Marlboro brand could be transformed from a brand associated with women into a brand associated with men if it was marketed as a cigarette for rugged, independent men. And he saw the Cowboy as the perfect embodiment of this. So he began to develop the Marlboro Man campaign around this concept. And the campaign was based upon an emotional appeal: rugged,
Yeah.
individual, tough, cowboy. Who doesn't want to be a cowboy?
The beauty of making a shift like this in the 1950s is none of the new target audience has probably ever seen one of these ads of the lady in the dress that was probably in Good Housekeeping or a women's magazine. So you start shifting, and today it would be all over Twitter. Oh, they're trying to sell this lady cigarette to these macho guys.
Well, case in point, look what's happening with Bud right now.
Well, I was thinking Bud Light, yeah.
In terms of the
like
in terms of the
like the first
repositioning they're trying to do right
the
now.
first ads for Marlboro were not a cowboy in a dress. That's not how you that's not how you shift into this.
And I don't know, but that also may be part of the reason why the first year it was not successful. When you do a repositioning where you're moving something from one market to another market, success does not happen right away. It
Mhm.
is slower and it takes time. And as I said, this campaign, one of the most iconic and most successful of all time, was almost pulled. Leo Burnett fought hard to get a second year for this campaign.
Okay.
Like they really wanted to pull it, and he was like, "No, guys, stick with this." Now, the original Marlboro Man, what's interesting, this guy by the name of Robert Norris, and he was a real life cowboy. Like they actually went and they found a real life cowboy. But guess what? He was not. He was not a smoker. He had never smoked a cigarette in his life, and he remained a non-smoker. And he was a vocal non-smoker advocate because he actually, unfortunately, died from lung cancer. But
Oh,
he
wow.
was a real live cowboy, Robert Norris.
So that's interesting. I don't know whether he was a real live cowboy has a whole lot to do with the success because he would just he matched that image. Was did they play that up that they actually found a guy and then they parade him around as part of the whole deal?
I don't believe that they played it up, but the research I did do on it, Leo Burnett was very big on there had to be, it's kind of funny. In one hand, he was very big on authenticity. Like for people to buy this, it has to be real. And he felt that there was this
Right.
subtle thing that happened. So he wanted to find a real life cowboy. Now, on the other hand, he was okay with the fact that the person was a non smoker. So, it's like on one hand, it's got to be
Yeah.
authentic, but on the other hand, really doesn't need to be.
As long as he's holding the cigarette, we don't care.
Right. But I think there's this subtle thing that he felt that people would connect better if it was a real live cowboy.
Sure.
And look, today in the world, that becomes even more important because when things are not authentic, it gets found out and it gets spread out all over the world.
Yeah. I also am just curious. I don't know if you have any details on this, but in the year that it took to get going, I know traditionally in the tobacco industry, man, they do a whole at least they did until they got their hands tied a little bit, but they used to do a whole lot of things like samples and, venue types of thing, like getting people to experience it, right? It's the traditional, almost the traditional drug dealer, kind of business model. "Hey, the first one's free," right? Here's a little sample pack kinda thing. And you go to rodeos and you go to events and you just pass out little packs. Do you know if that was a part of this? Because that can accelerate the experience of people with the brand.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I hadn't come across anything on that, and I had not dug into that. The part that I found that was the most interesting when I was researching this was the fact that Marlboro started off as a woman's brand, and then they
Yeah,
did this very successful pivot. And in fact, the one thing I did notice is when you look at the earlier ads versus the later ads, over time, the ads became more and more rugged,
yeah.
right? This whole idea of Marlboro and the tagline Marlboro Country, welcome to Marlboro Country. But over time, they leaned more and more into this rugged, individual, tough imagery.
you start trying to tie your brand to affinity groups that identify the same way, right? So,
Right.
of course, you're going to be sponsoring professional rodeos, and you're going to sponsor motorsports and all the things that guys are into. You're going to be there, right? You're going to
Yes.
have your name and your brand on all of that stuff. And I would say that takes a little while to gear up,
Yes.
right? There's a lot of moving pieces there.
Yes, and you also got to remember this was happening in the 60s and 70s and things like that,
Yeah.
where these things were much more segregated than they are today, right?
Yeah, it's almost a Red Bull play,
Yes.
right? You're just tying your brand to adventure, and in this case, to rugged individualism, cowboy life, He-Man kind of stuff.
It's that whole self-identification. I identify as being I'm not a cowboy, but I'm my own rugged individual
Yeah,
who's
exactly.
forging his own path and is tough and reliable and all these
Mhm.
other things. And so therefore you identify and you end up
Yeah.
smoking this cigarette that frankly used to be favored by women.
Yeah, amazing story. I mean, you can repoint a brand and start identifying it with another group if you're trying to breathe new life into it.
Yeah. But
So
it takes time.
it takes time, and man, I think it'd be harder today than it was in the 1950s.
Stay tuned. We're going to wrap up this story and tell you how to apply this lesson to your business right after this.
Nice one.
Thanks.
We should do this more often, man.
I wish we could.
And why can't we?
It's my business.
What about it? Thought everything was good.
It was.
Do I hear a but in there?
Sales have started to flatten, and we're down over last year.
Oh.
Can't figure it out. Tried a bunch of stuff. Putting in more time doesn't seem to make a difference.
Yikes.
It's frustrating.
Have you spoken to Steven?
Who?
The host from the podcast we just interrupted?
No.
Why not? I thought you were trying stuff.
I am, but what's Steven gonna do?
He'll work with you for free.
You mean that starter session thing?
Yep.
I don't know.
What do you have to lose?
Not much, I guess.
So, you gonna book one?
Yeah, why not? Where do I do it again?
I think you can do it right from this podcast.
Cool, thanks.
You bet.
We really should do this more often.
Golf more or interrupt this podcast?
Over to you, Dave.
Book your starter session on this podcast's website. Just visit theempirebuilderspodcast.com and click on Get Started.
Let's pick up our story where we left off, and trust me, you haven't missed a thing.
You brought up an interesting point that I hadn't considered. There's a reasonable chance that men seeing the Marlboro Man ad for the first time may not have ever seen the Mild as May ads focused at women, where today the reality is we would have been exposed to both.
Mm-hmm.
Case in point is the Bud Light repositioning going on, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if Marlboro or if let's say Bud Light, if they had found another affinity group in the 1950s and decided to market to the trans community, the core audience of Marlboro might never even noticed. These affinity groups could maintain some separation, and often you just didn't know what people that didn't share all of your activities were doing.
For background, let's share with people, what the Bud Light thing is that's happening right now, where that's exactly what's going on. Let's face it, Bud Light, when we think about Bud Light, we think about it as being a bowling alley beer that's drunk by, guys at NASCAR, right? And right now they ran a campaign, and who knows where this campaign goes, but where it was very much targeted to, alternative lifestyle.
And it was a very limited thing. They did a little promotional bit with influencer.
Transgender influencer.
Community.
Yeah.
And then the haters got a hold of that and decided that, well, this doesn't fit the brand image because I'm part of the brand image and it doesn't fit me.
Yes.
Right. And so it threatened their identity. Honestly, most of these brands, Marlboro back then, Bud Light now, it's like they're part of a giant, mindless corporation, and all they care about is the bottom line, right? So I don't think Anheuser-Busch InBev Global Corporation gives a rip either way.
And this is what always creates the opportunity for someone to emerge and garner market share, is by appealing to a community and providing that self-identification and being authentic. Like authenticity, does count. But, the Marlboro Man, I felt as a campaign, deserved some recognition, just because, again, you think about how iconic it has been in
Yeah.
our lexicon and our ideals and the success of the campaign. And it was all built around this idea of self-identification. And they were able to pivot a brand from it being a woman's cigarette to a man's rugged cigarette.
And then continue to hold on to that. If they hadn't taken Leo Burnett's advice and stuck it out past the year mark, it might be a brand that we've just never heard of today. But they identified their audience, they leaned hard on it, and they did it for the next 40 or 50 years. I mean, they're still doing it. They just can't do it in some of the public ways that they used to be able to do it.
And what we know is if they could, they would. It was, tribute to Leo Burnett and the team at Marlboro that they stuck with it through that 1 year chickening out period, because it's tough.
Yeah. It is tough. I think that's a good lesson for any of our listeners is you don't know what your chickening out period is, right? Depending on a lot of factors, one of the most important being product purchase cycle. You could make the case that product purchase cycle of cigarettes is pretty darn short.
It's very short.
Right? You smoke a pack. I mean, I remember back in the day, my dad was a 1 pack a day guy. At the very minimum, he could switch at the end of a carton.
Right, but the thing that we forget is people have a favored one that they're doing, so you've got to get them to leave what they're doing now to come to yours, and that's always hard.
That's why I think sampling probably played a pretty big role, because if you're spending money on a pack a day and somebody offers you, hey, here's 6 free cigarettes, are you going to take them?
Yeah, probably.
Heck yeah, right?
Yeah.
I'll take them. Maybe I'll just smoke them while I drive. Nobody will see me.
Yeah,
Right?
you're probably.
Is it a lady's cigarette? I'll smoke it while I drive.
Yeah.
Right. I'll pull out something else when I get to the office.
I wouldn't be surprised if sampling was part of the campaign. Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. But to lean hard on it and continue to identify with that audience, I think that's the lesson here. And I've had clients where, man, a year in and they think the needle ought to be moving a lot quicker than it is, but they're in a business like agricultural real estate, for example. It's like,
Right.
that's a long, long product. But like some of those properties haven't changed hands in a lifetime.
Right.
Right. Roofing. You don't roof your house every year. You
Right.
hope. So how long do you have to wait till you know that your new marketing plan is working? Sometimes you have to wait a long time.
Yeah, so you think about it, 1954, they start the campaign. A year later, it's hardly working. They almost bail on it. And by the late 1960s, they've got 25% market share. And by 1970, $20 billion worldwide. So what we also know is when these things start to work, they really work big.
Yeah. And then you really want to make sure you're sticking to the message.
No kidding. No kidding.
Absolutely. The campaign is working, not the individual ad.
That's right.
Absolutely. What a fun conversation, even though it's about cigarettes.
There you go. Well, we've had a couple of others about cigarettes, so had to cover this one.
Marlboro Man. Thanks, Stephen.
All right. Thanks, David.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Please share us. Subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave us a big, fat, juicy 5-star rating and review. And if you have any questions about this or any other podcast episode, email to questions@theempirebuilderspodcast.com.